Hello, I'm Becky Dodds from Agri-tech, and I'm so excited to be here today to talk to you about how we're using AI in agriculture. I think it's a really fascinating topic and I hope that you really enjoy this talk. So just a tiny bit about us. Agri-tech, we're a membership organisation and we work with farmers and growers, we work with researchers, technology companies and business support. And really the aim of it is to get innovation out into the field, get people using it and improve our farm productivity here in the UK and overseas. So I'm going to be talking to you today about what some of our technology companies are doing with AI and how farmers are making use of AI on their farm to increase productivity and improve the food they grow as well. So I thought I'd just start with a few myths about AI. I think that some people are a bit worried about the scope of it, what it can do. And I also think that it's not often communicated very well. I think there's quite a lot of phrases that aren't well explained. I just wanted to give you a little bit of context on how I think about AI as we go through some of the applications that I've come across before. For me, AI is basically a data analyst. That's how I would use it. Obviously better than any human data analyst that's been around. So I think AI is great for discovering new patterns in data, perhaps finding new relationships between data. It's amazing at prediction, which we're not very good at, I don't think. So it's very helpful for that. It's also very good at understanding complex data where perhaps you're pulling in different kinds of data from multiple sources. So the machine learning part of AI is just a subset of AI. It's just how this particular piece of AI might work. And the learning is what enables it to make new connections. If I taught an AI to work exactly the same way I did, I wouldn't find out anything new. So that's all it is really. I just want to touch base on some of the concerns that people have. I know there is some concern about whether AI is too powerful, things like that. And I'm sure some of you have probably watched The Social Dilemma on Netflix, where they're talking about how algorithms are influencing human behaviour, influencing elections, that kind of thing. And I think I'd just like to caveat that with the fact that it's really down to how humans are using it. I don't think the technology itself is an issue, as it never is. A bit of regulation around how social media platforms are using algorithms, for example, would probably reduce quite a lot of the issues that we're seeing with it. So I just kind of wanted to lead with that. I think that's quite a big misconception that I've come across. Let's jump into it. And I just wanted to touch briefly about why agri-tech. Why is it important? So I'm not from an agriculture background. I don't know how long more I can say that for now. It's been probably about 6-7 years I've been working here, but nevertheless, I can understand that perhaps some of you probably don't have experience with agriculture and perhaps are thinking we're very behind the times, not very open to adoption. And I absolutely hope that I can change that opinion today. Some of the tech that is being used on farm is absolutely cutting edge. And I think it's only going to become more prevalent as we move away from EU subsidies, which is a whole other conversation, but yeah, I think there will definitely be more. So just thinking about a few of the technologies, you're thinking about data management, farm apps all over the place. You can also think about drone technology, it's widely used and we'll come back to that. And vertical farming as well. I mean, these are all things you can go out and see in action right now. So I will say that adoption has been a bit slower in agriculture than in other industries, and I'm just going to touch on why, because I think it will probably apply to construction as well. So if we take an industry like manufacturing, where there's quite a lot of uptake of technology, in manufacturing, you have a lot of repetitive tasks that are quite easy to automate. Might be a robot, that's just doing this, for example. And then if you think about agriculture, the really big challenge is the variability. There are some factors, such as a crop that was in the field before, the kind of soil you're using, that will always stay the same, but a lot of things will change. So things like weather variability, climate, soil nutrient content, you name it, it's going to change year on year. You also only have one chance to get it right. If you don't plant your crop at the right time because you're trying something new, you've lost your income for the year. So it makes it a little bit more challenging to invest and put in the time and effort to try out these new things. And then once you start adding in things like pressure from regulators or the retailer quotas, all these kinds of things, it makes it challenging. But that being said, it is being taken up and people do use it. So let's have a look at a few examples where AI has improved productivity. So I'm going to start here with a quick look at data. So the backbone of any AI training and use is decent data. And by decent here, we're talking about consistent, reliable, we're talking about good enough, doesn't have to be perfect, but good enough quality. And you have to have quite a lot of it as well. So that makes it quite interesting for agriculture. We're at a really interesting point here where historically data is quite got quite a lot of gaps in it. It's been manually recorded, it's been put in an Excel sheet by different people, different times. It's all not been measured consistently. But on the other hand, farmers are overwhelmed with data. They're now getting data from sensors, from drones. They can take data with their mobile phones, they can put it in manually in their spreadsheets still. They'll get data about what they've harvested and the quality of it. So they have too much data, but none of it's that good. And historically, we don't have much at all. And I think that can be a bit of a barrier to adopting AI. I think that can be a challenge, but it can be overcome. So historically, like I say, farm paperwork has all been manual. I can tell you there are farmers who just have USB sticks with who knows what on where from when. But that is changing, so now we have got access to farm management apps where you can upload your data through a mobile phone. Anyone can take a picture, that kind of thing. It's quite easy to record, include your GPS locations, that sort of stuff. So at a glance, you can see how your crops are doing and where you are and that kind of stuff. But if you then bring in the AI processing, that's where things get really interesting. So with that data, you could perhaps predict your harvest date. And if you can predict your harvest date or your spraying date, whatever it is, you can then schedule the right people for the right job at the right time. So it just makes everything a little bit easier to manage. So here I've also got a couple of examples of data collectors that I'm sure in construction you're also familiar with. Drone technology is really prevalent on farm now. Quite easy to take some pictures of your crop, you can have a quick look, and it makes a lot of sense in a farm context because you've got a large space, you've only got a few people working it, and actually to take your time out to go and walk all those crops, it takes forever. So it's a really good time saving, but it gives you a nice quick overview of everything on your farm. But if you take that a step further, companies like Hummingbird will process that data for you, the images, and that could be different kind of light spectra photos as well. It might be RGB, but it could be IR images, all that kind of thermal images, that kind of stuff. And once you process all of those layers together through the AI, you can then start picking up signs of disease, for example, really early on. Once you've seen it in the crop yourself, probably a little bit late. So to have that early warning system is really valuable because you can prevent things from happening rather than just reacting to them. And that's where it's really helpful. And I know that company's also going to be looking at producing a carbon sustainability score for each farm. So by amalgamating all the data from across farms, all anonymous, no one needs to know specifically. But you can use the AI to come up with kind of a benchmarking score for each farm so they know whether they're doing really well, whether they need to do a bit better, whether they've got worse, better, and that's invaluable information. So you could also use remote sensing to collect the data for you. In this example, you could think about soil moisture sense for the farm. So it's just a probe, you shove it in and it will tell you sort of how wet your soils are. And that will give you an indication of whether you need to water it, whether you don't, for example. I mean, it could be any kind of factor. It could be the pH level, it could be the chemical composition, all kinds of stuff, But if you then start building into that some AI processing using data from perhaps weather prediction, you could then start saying, oh, the soil's very dry today, we ought to irrigate. But actually, it's going to rain tomorrow, so don't bother. Or, you can start predicting things like spray dates. So perhaps in a week's time, the weather's going to be right, the soil's going to be the right moisture, that's going to be really great day to spray, so put it off till next week. And it's again, farmers can make these kind of decisions themselves, but to have a little bit of data behind it, it just gives a little bit of extra validation to that knowledge. And finally, you could also use IoT remote sensing to predict machinery downtime. I'm going to come on to this a little bit later as well, but you could have a sensor in the tractor which knows that this part is going to go in a week, so we better schedule an engineer. But actually, next week's going to be the middle of harvest and you'll probably, the weather's going to be good, pulling in that data again. So actually you're likely to be out harvesting. So really we need to get this fixed this week now so you're ready to harvest and you're not going to break down in the middle and lose the window for harvesting. Again, it's just so helpful to know that kind of thing rather than having to deal with the problem when it occurs. And just to reiterate there, the data that you are analysing, it could be in any form and you can pull all of that into one platform. It doesn't all have to be the same. So it might be data imagery, it might be numerical, it might be text-based, who knows. But it's really good at analysing all those different sources of information to kind of give you a good insight into what's going on. So let's dive a little bit deeper into how we can make the most of AI and how pulling all this data from different sources can benefit your business. There's quite a lot I could talk about and get excited about here. I think it's really cool stuff. But it is really important to take a step back and just remember why we want to use it. I think it's quite easy to get very excited about all the possibilities. Think of all the stuff that you could find out about your business and how it's going to change your lives and things like that. But actually, I would usually start at the end and work backwards. What is it you want to know? What are you missing? And then can AI be the solution to help you find that data or find that relationship or give you that insight? I'd also say not to worry too much about how it works. It's going to be a bit like social media or your mobile phone. We all use it. Some of you use it now, I suspect, and don't even know about it. So you don't really need to get hung up in how it works, but you just need to know about what it's going to give you. So we've touched already on the data that you might want to collect, and I'm sure in your own businesses you can think of great examples. So let's look at how that processing can really improve that data knowledge. A really lovely example of how this is being done in agriculture is a project called the Ice Cam. This is 5-6 years old now, this project. It's really interesting, and it's using AI to predict the harvest dates of lettuces. So lettuce is an interesting crop. It's got a very short cycle. It's a bit longer to grow in the winter, but I mean in the summer, a few weeks and it's ready to go. But lettuce demand also changes quite quickly depending on the weather. So we had a lovely weekend this weekend, and I'm sure a few of you have had a barbecue and thought you'd go and buy a lovely salad to go with that. So usually you have to overplant to make sure you're going to meet, what might be an increase in demand depending on the weather. But if you get a cold summer, no one wants it. You get a late summer, everyone wants it a bit later. So it's quite hard to plan for that. So the way that they're using this is a bit of drone technology, so they can image the crops in the field. And then they're also using AI modelling to predict what the weather's going to be like. So what this effectively gives them is you can say, today you need to plant X amount of lettuces to be ready for the increase in demand in 3 weeks' time. It's going to be warm, so it's going to grow quite quickly. So that's how many we put in today. And the long and short of it is they've massively reduced their waste because they can be quite confident in what they're planting at the right time, rather than kind of hedging their bets on what they think might happen. And obviously that translates to big cost savings for the business. So it's a no-brainer. A kind of blue sky example, it's a nice research project over at Harper Adams called the Hands-Free Hectare. And the idea is to farm a farm with no human intervention. Now, I would quite like to preface this by saying I don't think this is where the future of agriculture is. I don't think it's the future of any industry, and I know that the project leaders do not think that either. But what it is a really nice experiment to see what data we need, how the machines can work together, how we could automate planting, just improve some of these processes, improve harvesting, because the machines might actually find a better way to do it than we already do. And the AI processing here, you need to pull in all the data so it knows what it's doing, where it is. And one simple example is just having the tractor drive from the tractor shed to the field. You need to have that kind of vision and recognising like when people or animals are walking in front of the tractor, so it's safe to stop, So it's a really great project. If you want to know more, I'd have a look. They've got some nice videos about that. So just a final example, I think this is a really nice example of something that we can achieve with AI that perhaps we couldn't achieve just through human knowledge. Integrating data into robotic milking. So robotic milking is really cool. And basically the cow can come in of its own accord whenever it wants to, and the robot will milk it. But while it's being milked, it will actually test the milk coming from there. And from doing that, it can actually start to get ideas about its welfare, or perhaps if there's first signs of disease, or maybe it's lacking some nutrition, for example. And then once the cow's finished being milked, if there's an issue, it can go off into its own separate pen and it'll alert the farmer, who can come and have a look, find out what's going on. And then you can start pulling that in with things like RFID tags, so you can get a picture of how often the cow is perhaps inside the cow shed and how often it's going out to pasture, how much it's moving as well is a really key health indicator. So it's actually been really interesting to see, and one of the unintended benefits of using this technology is such a vast improvement in cow welfare. I can't really go into the details of it all now, but basically the cows are much happier to come in, be milked when they want to be, rather than whenever the farmer can do it. And they've actually found quite a big increase in output as well from the cows, because they like to be milked more often than we can do it ourselves. But it's really fascinating, application of technology with these unintended benefits that perhaps we didn't think about before we started doing it. So cows and lettuces, they're obviously very agriculture specific challenges and solutions, but you can start to see how this might apply to construction. Perhaps you could use this tool to schedule the right people for a job that is weather dependent. Perhaps you might be able to predict a certain date that a project might be finished, so you don't have all your projects in the same kind of phase. You know, you can move your workers on to the next part and the tools that you need, things like that. Or you might find that perhaps a combination of drone imagery and sensor data that's being processed by the AI might be able to predict an unknown problem. Obviously, I'm not in the construction industry, so I could be a bit wrong here, but you know, perhaps there is some kind of issue that you would be able to spot with this kind of technology. The AI might actually think, I've seen these sort of variants before, and actually this is what happened. And in that case, then you can predict that this might happen, and you can get the tools or the supplies that you need in advance, and it won't hold up those building projects you have on. So I'm just going to kind of start to wrap up here with a bit of sort of the barriers and also the opportunities that it gives you as well, you know, the benefits of doing it. Obviously with this technology I can tell you about how great it is, but there are always barriers to adoption. This is a nice piece of work that's been done by Dr. David Rose looking at specifically agri-tech adoption within agriculture, and some of the reasons why we might not do that, and you can see it's all really interesting research but quite complicated. But in particular I'd like to really highlight at this point how important it is to communicate to your team the new tools that they will be using and why they're going to use it. Especially as I mentioned before, I think there is some apprehension especially around AI. So being able to tell your team that perhaps this is a new tool we're going to use, this is how it's going to help you with your everyday work. It's not going to replace what you do. And there's also an opportunity for upskilling as well, to learn some new technology. To give an example from agriculture, we might not be picking strawberries anymore, but we might well be servicing the machines that do. So, you know, there are opportunities, and I think it's just very important to communicate that. And to summarise all the benefits that I've been speaking about today, you can really base your decisions on information as well as experience. So in terms of agriculture, these technologies do not replace the farmer. I mean, they have so much knowledge, it's immense. And they've worked that land and they know all about the local microclimates, and that's something that AI doesn't know about. But there are things that the farmer perhaps doesn't know about, which is, you know, especially in the predictive space, being able to make those decisions with the most amount of data you can and information that you can is never going to be a bad thing. You can also improve your efficiency. You can automate some really time-consuming jobs, especially things like data entry or data processing. It takes a long time for a human to do that. So you can actually spend your time working on your specialised and knowledge-based tasks that you need to do rather than your daily admin kind of stuff. For construction, it's probably quite relevant that you can have a centralised point of data. You can actually manage all your projects in one space, being able to see the data from all things, and especially things, as I mentioned, around scheduling jobs or people or tools that you need at a certain site at a certain time. Being able to do that is probably a huge benefit for anybody, really. Long term, you're going to have better resilience as well, because you're going to have a better understanding of your business. You're going to have a better understanding of what might happen in the future, and how you could use these models to try out new variables as well. So you could see, you know, if this happens, how would we deal with it, and do we need to put steps in place to mitigate that? So to finally wrap up, I just want to reiterate that AI, machine learning, natural language processing, all these phrases, they are just another tool in the toolbox. That's all they are. This technology has been around far longer than I have, and it's had absolutely decades of research behind it. It's not a new phenomenon. And what's changed is the processing power, and also cloud computing as well has made this an accessible technology. This technology should not be a replacement for people. That's not what it is. It should be able to enhance your decision making and help provide the additional insight that perhaps you didn't have before. And actually, if you've got an issue that you can't find a cause for, you might find that AI might come up with a few solutions for you. I'm really excited to see about how we're all going to make the most of AI and how it's going to progress over years to come. So thank you ever so much for listening to me today. If it hasn't come across already, I have a huge enthusiasm for AI. I think it's really fascinating stuff. I really am genuinely excited to see what we can do with it. It's evolving so rapidly. I think the applications are going to be numerous. I think it's going to really influence how we work every day. Thank you very much, and I hope that you go away really enthused about the future of AI and how we can use it in all of our businesses.